Kyle Williams is set to be, or expected to be, I should say, but it's happening. Kyle Williams will be your next defensive line coach at LSU. There's a lot of things that you and I need to break down on that. Number one, I do really like the hire, as I opened up in the opening monologue, for reasons that, from a national perspective, when you see a hire like this, logically, you're going to be like, well, that might not be a good hire for LSU. Based off of what we know as Tiger fans, what Kyle's done the last 4 years, yes, at a high school, yes, at Ruston High School, what he has done, who he's been, the games that he's played in the NFL, being a national champion here, the things that he has overcome to be where he's at. The question that I think that I want to know for sure, what happened in that meeting for Brian Kelly to be like, we're shutting it down. Like, this dude impressed us enough. Brian Kelly impressed us enough. We need to bring him in. Here's what I know for a fact. Yesterday, Kyle Williams came in for an interview. I heard after that interview, it was over. It was over. Which tells me a couple of things. It tells me, number one, LSU did their part of selling it. But number two, that Kyle Williams, for what it's worth, did something in that interview to make Brian Kelly, Scott Woolward, who is in that building every day, Austin Thomas, Frank Wilson, and others, to shut this thing down. Here's what I believe that you're going to get in Kyle Williams. First and foremost, you go into a room that's very versatile right now, but you also go into a room right now that's very volatile. In that volatility, you have a guy that none of those guys in that defensive line room can look at Kyle Williams, especially with the recent past history, that this guy is not just a guy, but that he's a flat-out dude. He played 183 games in the NFL. He had 48 and a half sacks with 103 tackles for loss. 103 tackles for loss in a 13-year career. 2 of those, by the way, he got injured in. So 11 full seasons, he had 103 tackles for loss. 5 seasons with double-digit tackles for loss, statistically. And he had a year in 2013 where he had 10 and a half sacks. No one in that interior defensive line room has been, but does have the potential to be, a lot like what this guy can be. Guys, quite frankly, from a pro aspect, and even from Kyle Williams' time at LSU, playing in 46 games, starting in 33 of them, having 16 and a half sacks as an interior defensive lineman. Guys, you're learning from one of the best to ever do it at LSU, period. Point blank. Kyle does not have the entire defensive line room, just so everybody understands that. Kevin Peoples heads the edge unit. He is coaching interior defensive tackles. A 41-year-old guy that went here, bled here, loved it here. Now he gets to teach the knowledge to the guys and to the people that are now through their journey at LSU. In the 4 years that Kyle Williams spent at Ruston, here's what I know personally as a fact. That entire program, especially defensively, developed overnight. It wasn't because they didn't have good kids. It wasn't because they didn't have good players. He was a big part of the development and what you needed to do. Got guys like Ahmad Bro. You'll have guys like Aiden Anding who will come in here and be a critical piece when he continues to be developed. In reference to the interior defensive tackle, there were the 3 things that you needed. Let's focus on them. I think that Kyle, in his own way, has shown that he's taken a place, developed it to something that was really special. There's nobody in LSU's room right now, even more than Bo Davis, that knows the game of football more than Kyle Williams. No one. He's literally been there at the highest level doing what he did. I do think the technique, I do think the philosophy, I think the overall awareness goes up. I think that you, in some aspects, Bo Davis is great at what he does. There will be some aspects that Kyle Williams will be able to translate and get through to kids in a more relatable fashion and speak their language on what they need to do in certain situations. I think this is a developmental piece home run from a guy that you can sit there and learn from. There's not going to be more people who can tell you and teach you about defensive line and the defensive line room than him. Now, I know where a lot of you want to go with this. There are some questions. Like, Blake, it's a massive leap going from high school to LSU. We just did it with Robert Steeples. I mean, I guess technically you could say we hire a guy in Kevin Falk. Then, yeah, he was at LSU for a little while before he became the running backs coach. But at the same token, it was his first time really doing this. That is true. There are just things for me at the current moment that I don't know that if I can explain. Because I don't think that you have had a more technical guy that can develop interior defensive tackles more than this. I know it sounds like a hot take, but guys, you cannot replace 183 games in the NFL. You just cannot do it. Bo Davis has been around a long time. When Bo Davis was coaching in the 13 years away from LSU, when Kyle Williams left, Bo Davis pretty much left. We're around the same time. One guy was coaching it, another guy was actually playing it and developing it and being the most consistent LSU Tiger defensive tackle in modern history. Guys, he is, let's call it what it is. He is the best interior defensive tackle that you've had in modern history. That is who he is. There are levels of concern. We just mentioned the high school jump to college. The only thing that I can say is, man, you might want to familiarize yourself with what was happening at Ruston and how bad things had gotten. He felt like he needed to step in. He did. And quite frankly, he made that place a powerhouse. The truth was, I've seen Kyle multiple times. Got to see him at Denham, about a year ago? No, not even a year ago. What? Maybe 6 months ago. Whenever Rustin came down to Denham, got to have a conversation. Coach, your D-line's doing the Ahmad Bro senior year. So that was over a year ago. The Ahmad Bro senior year, because he was a menace. His whole defensive line was fantastic. He developed a lot of really good kids. Quite frankly, he developed a kid that started for you in 7 games in Ahmad Bro, who had no business playing in the interior defensive tackle room. Had no business being a 3-tech. Kid held his own when he needed to. I just, for whatever reason, the worry for me, it's not there because I've seen him develop guys in high school. And I think that, God, it's going to, well, Blake, this is college. This isn't high school. I get it. I mean, listen, man, the dude basically was, at the end of his career, they called him the coach. The dude was always there for these young players. I just feel like it's in his nature to be great here. It's in his nature. I understand the level of concerns that a lot of you are going to have because I have him too. It's always going to be in the back of my mind, like, man, it is risky in the sense of this guy's never coached in college. He's never coached in the NFL. I get it. All of that is risky. I just, for me at the current moment, I got to go with my gut here. I'm not going to go with my brain. I'm not going to go with history. I'm not going to go with logic, because the logic would tell you that you should be skeptical. I'm going against it. I'm going to go with my gut. I think Kyle can be the guy that turns this around. I hope this, for what it's worth, I hope that he's here for multiple years. For you need consistency more than anything at that position. More than anything. What can he do with guys like Don McKinley, Ahmad Bro, Sadir Mitchell, and others? What does Tank Guillory, what does Sean Washington do? Can he develop that room? Because quite frankly, guys, that room did not get better last year. It didn't get better. There was no developmental piece from anybody. None. Zero. There is an area of concern, if I did have one, though. It is recruiting. It's not that I don't think that Kyle Williams can go into a living room and sit down with a kid and say, well, listen, kid, I just got done playing in the NFL. I played there for 13 years. I had 50 sacks in the NFL. I had 103 tackles for loss. I had a season in 2013 where I had double-digit sacks as an interior defensive lineman. I was the core of Buffalo when they started turning things around before Josh Allen really got there and got going. You're going to have to back him financially. You're going to have to back him and help him rebuild that room. You do not make a hire like Kyle Williams because of the recruiting piece of it. You hire Kyle Williams because of who he is, and you know that guy's got a lot of knowledge and that can help develop that room. You got to go and get big-name dudes. Let him develop those big-name dudes. Go out there and drop your cojones. Go do what Texas did. Well, Blake, we can't pay a high school kid that much money out of high school. Well, then you don't have trust in your developmental piece. You don't have trust in your scouting department if you don't want to go out there and pay a kid from high school that can help lead you to a championship. Again, I'm going to throw this out there. Speaking of Texas, they did that with Colin Simmons. Colin Simmons in the playoffs wrecked things. You got to do that with Kyle. Now, the interior is a tougher place to do that in, and I'm with you. Last time that we saw a freshman bona fide do what he did was him. We thought it'd be Mason Smith. It wasn't. It was Kyle Williams. This has got to be it. What I'm saying here from recruiting, everybody wants to come in here and say, Blake, I'm worried about Kyle Williams in recruiting. I'm with you. I'm with you. I understand what you're trying to say, but here's the truth. It is not on Kyle Williams alone to recruit that room. Everybody, Brian Kelly included, everybody has got to have their hands in that room recruiting. Austin Thomas, Preston Tiffany, analysts, scouts, GMs, doesn't matter who it is. You have to help him rebuild that room and rebuild the talent in that room to get back to where you need to be. Because I promise you, if you do that for him, he's going to develop that room at a very high level. I feel it. You can't spare anything. It's a kid in North Louisiana. Go get him. Who gives a Rudy Poo? If you like him, if he can play here, if he's an LSU guy, go get him. If he's not, then that's another story. You got one on your campus in Lamar Brown. Go get him. Who's the next big defensive tackle that's out there? Let's go get him. Who's the number 2 guy on our big board right now? Go get him. It's not on Kyle Williams alone. I do think that you can get the consistency piece here, which was probably the biggest piece that you needed. Guys, you've had 8 defensive line coaches in 10 years. In 5 years. 8. This marks 8. You needed the consistency. The recruiting piece, if you do not recruit well the defensive tackle room, don't come up into here. Do not come off into here saying that, well, Blake, he couldn't recruit. Because here's the truth. You went out and got one real DB at corner. You went and got other guys from in-state. I got that. I think that was more other people on staff than maybe Corey. You backed this DJ Pickett thing with money when you did it. That is the truth. A truth. You got to do that with Kyle. Guys, the game of recruiting is about relationships and will always be about relationships. Relationships don't mean shit when that money starts flying. It doesn't. Not in today's world. Guys, don't trust me. Trust the number one defensive tackle in last year's class, Justice Terry. And what did he say? I'm a Georgia Bulldog. He told On 3, I am a Georgia Bulldog. I wanted to be a Georgia Bulldog, but the truth was I had to make a business decision. Texas offered me a lot more money than Georgia did. And I said, okay. Well, two teams that just played in the SEC championship game. And before you say anything about Texas, they've been to back-to-back Final Fours, and you have not made it to a playoff. So they went out and spent the money to get where they needed to be. You got to do it here. I know a lot of you are going to think it's a risky hire. You're not going to get that from me here. You're just not going to. I understand and will probably hear a lot of your concerns when we take phone calls. And if you disagree with it, if you disagree with the hire, I highly suggest that you call into the show. Now, if you're doing it on rewatch, if we're rewatching the show, even if you're drunk, y'all know how many people call at the end of the shows? Like, they'll call it like 10:30. Hey, man, I was watching the show. And just wanted to tell you, I wanted to give you my opinion on it. Are we live? Like, I'll be doing something in my office here, and they're calling. I'm like, all right, I'm going to answer it. Now that phone's going to keep buzzing all damn day. I think the reward ultimately is going to outweigh the risk. But let me ask you all this question first, though. Let me ask you all of this, though. Well, let me ask a reasonable question. I'm going to go ahead and ask it. What do you expect from Kylewilliams in year one anyway? A lot of you are willing to give Bo Davis a mulligan year until he can really start developing guys. You're not going to do the same thing for Kylewilliams? Because you need the consistency here. If you're going to say that Bo Davis didn't have anything, then what are you going to say about Kylewilliams? This is not an instant going to come in here and fix every single thing. Give Kyle 3 years and it's going to work. I'm telling you it's going to work. All right. We do have a super chat in here. Alexander Taylor says, I wonder if he goes after a portal DT. I don't think that he will. I don't think that he will. I mean, he could levy for it. He could levy for it. He could go to Austin and say, hey, man, I really like this guy. Can I go get him? I don't know. We're going to see. And before you say, hey, why would he go to Austin? Why wouldn't he go to BK? You know what I mean by that. He ain't going to BK to say, hey, what's the money here? Guys, head coaches aren't GMs. They're not doing the money deals. They're leaving it up to GMs, all of them. Kirby confirmed that today at his press conference. Or yesterday, whatever it was. Do I think he should? Yeah. I do think that you should always be in the market for a defensive tackle. Always. And if it works, it works. It doesn't, it doesn't. Now, there's something here. I do wonder, Jamari Butler. I do wonder what's going to happen there. We'll see. LGZ says this is going to be our Brian Hartline hire. Our good friend LGZ. It very well could, man. And that's a good point. Brian Hartline worked out something very similar. Very similar. Brian Hartline has turned himself into the best recruiter of all time. Per them. Jeezy, I'll say this. Some of you know that I have a very solid connection at Ohio State. Brother, the money that they spend behind Brian Hartline at receiver is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Brian Hartline might be the best. No, not might be. Brian Hartline is the best wide receivers coach in the country. This has worked before. Listen, man. Listen. I'm going to go this side of the player here. There's no way that you're going to convince me that Bo Davis knows more about DT play than Kyle Williams. You're not going to do it. You are not going to convince me of that. Coaching a position and playing the position for the same amount of years when you've been coaching through your career. Spare me, man. Spare me. Now, does Bo have like a scouting thing on him? I'm sure he does. I'm sure he does. More knowledge of how the game works, contacts, resources, sure. But when it comes to playing defensive tackle, nobody ain't gonna happen. And I think the same thing happened with Brian Hartline. True Louisianimal 337 says, I love this hire. Good to hear. Holden Lee says, Jamari Butler is an edge guy, though. What do you mean by that? He's not an edge guy, not the way that you're going to line him up. So think about it like this. I do think Jamari Butler there will be instances, Holden, where he's going to be lined up on the outside in certain situations when it dictates it. If you go back and watch his Nebraska film, he's lined up technically as a 3-tech. So he's an edge guy. He's like your Savion Jones. Savion Jones wasn't on the exterior. He was on the interior. Basically, you're glorifying a pass rusher that's a tweener to go in the 3-tech on certain situations and rush the passer. Be a little more upfield and chaotic. You try to do it with Savion Jones, and the truth is that he was too bulky to be that position. What Blake Baker did at Missouri was that he would have a very athletic guy play the 3-tech. So if you get in a 2nd and 7, there would be a situation that you're instantly rotating, putting that guy there, and you're rushing the passer, and you're willing to give up a rushing lane. It's what they did the most. Now, if you remember, they tried to do that against Jaden Daniels, and he absolutely exposed Baker on doing that. So there are certain situations that it dictates it. Jamari Butler's more of your Savion Jones. Well, Savion Jones played the 5 technique. Yeah, he might be an edge, but on every and most downs, he's going to be head up to the 3-tech. That in and of itself, is going to be what he does. So you can call him an edge guy. I mean, when you're going to line up in that 5 technique over the head of the tackle or more shading into that 3 technique on the inside of it, I mean, I'm just not going to fight over the semantic of that. But you want to fight edge, interior guy, what they do there in that position. Look, I'll tell you this. During run game last year, during practice, Savion Jones was with the interior guys. They 100% were he was 100% with the interior guys in run drill. Alexander Taylor says, I think Bro and McKinley in year 2 is more talented than Piaz and Guillory. Listen, do not sleep on Sadir Mitchell now. Don't do it. What do you do with a 355-pound, 360-pound nose tackle? Is he just going to get moved? Right? Like, I mean, what happens with him? Don McKinley, we need to hit. He's got to hit. He's got to hit. You got to develop him to be a really good defensive tackle. If Kyle Williams comes in here and makes something of Don McKinley, and I hope Don McKinley just takes all of it in. Pause. But I hope that he takes all of this coaching in. There are some chances that you have some good players here. You got to develop him. You got to develop them. You got to develop them. I mean, guys, I'll keep saying it. It's your biggest position of need right now.